The society, founded by two Victorian women, now has a membership of more than 800,000 and an annual income of over £20 million. These resources have enabled it to become a formidable protector of wild birds. But some argue that in the process, it's become a persecutor of innocent people.
I find the RSPB are a first-class body. I find it a great pity that the reputation has been tarnished by a few officials.
I think they've gone outside the scope of their original intention. And I think that their investigators have got a bee in the bonnet, which it's very, very difficult to remove.
I don't think they care about birds. I just think they want to prosecute people to gain publicity, which brings in more money for the RSPB.
All those people and others we interview in this programme claim they've suffered injustice at the hands of the RSPB. We've examined cases going back over 10 years, which raise questions about whether the law protecting wild birds is too harsh and whether the RSPB is too zealous in its application. The RSPB is demanding the law should be tougher. Linked with an appeal for £400,000, it's launched a campaign for changes to increase the likelihood of successful prosecutions, and it wants harsher penalties, including custodial sentences. The Society's stated aim is to protect wild birds and their habitats. It acts by acquiring land to turn into reserves, by education, by campaigning and lobbying, and sometimes by keeping watch on the nests of rare birds. For the last 20 years, as the laws protecting wild birds have been strengthened, the RSPB has also employed full-time investigators. It now has 6 working in the Species Protection Department. 3 are former police officers. On occasions, they bring prosecutions of those alleged to have broken the laws designed to protect wild birds. Increasingly, though, they work with the police. Almost every police force in the country now has a wildlife liaison officer, and every year the RSPB helps to organise a conference for them. In 1990, the latest year for which detailed figures are available, the RSPB recorded more than 50 prosecutions under the legislation protecting wild birds. 5 of them related to alleged disturbance of birds, and in 3 the defendants were acquitted. The Wildlife and Countryside Act makes it illegal to steal eggs or chicks or damage nests of protected birds, but it also says you could be fined up to £2,000 for intentionally disturbing nesting birds. It's this clause which critics say is too vague, and which they claim can lead to harassment of innocent people. The peregrine falcon is an inspiration for Paul Stott.
I think everything about that bird's special, to be honest. The speed that it flies, the way it tumbles in flight, everything about that bird is magical. It just inspires me every time I see it. I never, ever get fed up of seeing it, and every spring, no matter where, I'm yearning to go back to the hills. And I've got to go amongst the hills to look at the peregrines.
For more than 20 years, Paul and his friends in the Northwest Protection Group have tried to protect birds of prey in Lancashire and the Lake District. Relations with the RSPB used to be friendly. It supplied Paul with special ink to mark eggs and so deter thieves. He claims these activities help to reduce persecution of birds of prey in these hills.
I've monitored the peregrine in southern Lakeland for the last 20 years and sent reports in for the last 10 years, which is obviously I've marked the eggs of the peregrine falcon, which involves quite a lot of rope work. It involves clambering down severe cliffs, which are obviously at times you risk your life to do this work, which I don't think anything of. It's for the good of the birds.
But one evening, 2 years ago, in this valley in the Trough of Bowland, an encounter began that would end in a courtroom for Paul Stott and his friend Carl Smith as they watched a peregrine eyrie through binoculars.
We went back and measured it, and we was in fact 189 metres away from the site. We viewed the site. We was very excited to see that the eyrie had reared young. You could see the young, no trouble at all. We enjoyed the spectacle for a few minutes and we left the site. Now, as we left the site, we was walking up the hillside away from the site. Carl said to me, there's 2 guys sat behind us above the eyrie.
I shouted to them, do you mind moving away and leaving the birds in peace? because the parents were very distressed. So they just sat down, and obviously we didn't get any response from them. We got a rude remark off them.
The two men were RSPB wardens. Paul and Carl were anxious to avoid a confrontation and left for home. On the way, they were intercepted by 3 police cars and arrested. 10 days later, Paul and his wife Valerie had their house raided.
On the warrant it says that they were looking for wild birds or wild birds' eggs, and obviously I was just shell-shocked.
I went upstairs and they'd got all my underwear, all my clothes out in the drawer. They searched all through my wardrobes, everywhere, and we just didn't know what was going on. It was very, very unpleasant.
I came in here and just sat here on my own. I just couldn't believe what was going on, especially when they started looking at my diaries and reading all my diaries. I mean, everything I've done in my bird watching career since I was a young boy, I've written in a diary, and they have eventually took the entire, I think it's about 10 or 12 diaries I've got, and they took the lot and said that to make good reading, which anybody who writes a diary, it's a real body blow to think that somebody's going to be reading your own personal writings. I mean, my own diary, I don't think Valerie's ever read them. It's just my own personal thoughts of my own life.
Did they make any remark about the eggs and the wild birds that they were supposedly looking for?
Well, to be quite honest, once the policeman started reading my diaries and he'd seen me returns I'd sent to the Nature Conservancy Council and to the RSPB, they seemed to back off a little bit. I think they realised, the policeman who came to this house realised he was on a wild goose chase. He was misinformed. He led us to the impression that things had been said against us which were untrue.
At the same time, Carl Smith and his fiancée Estelle Goldsmith had their house searched by police and an RSPB officer who were looking for eggs and wild birds.
I came in the bedroom, they'd been searching, and I says, that's my drawers over there. And he says, oh, I know that was the RSPB man who said that. And I says, well, you've no right to be looking in them. And he says, oh, you're all right, you're all right.
They're in the attic searching away, but they couldn't find anything. They found 1 or 2 more stuffed birds, which I've got up there, a pheasant, a few ducks and things like that. The reason I have got stuffed birds is because, as I've said before, my hobby's artwork, painting, and I use specimens for colour reference for the feathers.
Some of Carl's stuffed birds were removed with diaries and maps. Carl and Paul were offered the chance to take a caution if they'd admit they'd intentionally disturbed wild birds. They refused, so the case went to court, where both the police and the Crown Prosecution Service accepted they were acting in the interests of the birds.
It was said during the course of the interview that they had marked eggs, and the purpose for marking eggs was simply to protect the birds. And P.C. Smith, in answer to that particular point, said, yes, we accept that. And Paul Stott said, it's only for the good of the birds, nobody else. P.C. Smith, I accept that. P.C. Barber, we don't dispute that. It was quite surprising that the opening address to the court made by the prosecution was that here we have 2 defendants who are well respected